In the heart of the night, this world will burn bright. We will set it alight. In the heart of the night, in the heart of the night, this world will burn bright. We will set it alight. In the heart of the night.
Hello everyone, I am Anthropomantic Fiend, and I do horror-related things on the internet. Continuing my Howling series of videos, I'm going to be reviewing the Howling 3, otherwise known as the Marsupials. Now, this movie is barely connected to the first one, to be perfectly honest. There's a few, visual references and some plot stuff that echoes the first movie, but other than that, there's no recurring characters or locations or anything like that. This movie just happens to also be about werewolves, and very strange ones at that, as evident from the title, The Marsupials. This movie came out in 1987, and the cast is predominantly Australian. This movie is predominantly set in Australia as well, with some scenes in America and in Russia. But the actual actors as well are predominantly Australian. I don't really know many of them from other things. I know that one of them was in Queen of the Damned. I don't remember which one, and I have yet to see Queen of the Damned. I know I am a horrible vampire fan. It's predominantly set in Australia. The werewolves in this movie are, or at least the ones living in Australia, because there's, I don't know what you call it, werewolf families, clans, covens, wolf packs, I don't know what you call little werewolf villages and living spaces. You know what I'm trying to say, but anyway, there's werewolves living in Australia and werewolves living in Russia. The Australian werewolves are marsupials, which I still don't understand why, but they have sort of evolved to be almost like kangaroo werewolves, and the females carry their babies around in pouches, which they have both in their wolf form and in their human form. It's very weird. Soundtrack is decent enough. It's, it's an 80s horror soundtrack, and I tend to enjoy most of those. Even the sort of subpar ones have enough synths in them for me to decently enjoy them. And then there's a lot of oddly upbeat 80s music in this. I mean, you've got Bad Moon Rising is played in one scene, which is, super cliche for a werewolf movie, but then you've got, I think I heard Take On Me in the background of one scene for, no reason, and then there's just a bunch of, 80s pop style stuff in other scenes for, no reason. Cinematography, production design, etc. So, the movie looks decent. It's not especially stylized or anything, it's just pretty well shot. All the sets look real, for the most part. It's a good looking movie. It's not great, and it doesn't have any of that sort of shadowy atmosphere of the first Howling, or the weird gothic punk 80s bondage, I don't even know, stuff from the second movie, which is a shame because I loved that. It was stupid, but I loved it. There's also scenes with wolf cam and other stuff that I just didn't understand. There's scenes that are shot with a wide angle lens that sort of bends everything in it into sort of this sort of bubbly shape. You know what I mean. It's that weird sort of bent, curved look to everything, and they use that in sort of as the wolf's POV, and I don't really understand it, but it was kind of cool, but it was also kind of awkward. And then they use it in the final scene, which I'll talk to when I get to spoilers. It didn't really make sense to me. I mean, I can kind of see how it might work now that I'm thinking about it more, but it didn't really fit, but it didn't bother me. The acting in this movie, much like the second one, sort of ranges from decent to really weird and cheesy, and there's some characters that are just really fake, and other characters that are gloriously hammy, and other characters that act like actual people. And Some of the sort of forcedness might be due to the dialogue, which feels kind of weird and mechanical in some scenes, but again, didn't bother me all that much. I sort of adapted to the level of cheesiness in the movie, as I've tended to do since I watch mostly weird cult horror movies. And then you've got the overall plot is, I think, the government and some scientist guy find out that werewolves exist, and that they exist in Russia, which is apparently the Soviet Union at this time. It's really not specified what time period this is set in, although it definitely feels like the 80s due to some of the stuff I already mentioned. So the government and the scientists go in to investigate. Meanwhile, there's this woman who lives in this village, which is called Flo. I'll get to that in a minute. Her name is... God, I'm already forgetting what it is. It's a 3-syllable name, and I've already forgotten what it is. But anyway, that's her first name, and that's her first name and her last name for some reason. Don't know why. She lives in this little village of werewolves, and she is taken advantage of, sexually assaulted by one of them, and so she runs away, as you should. And she comes to America having never really known anything outside the village, it seems. She gets approached by this one guy who chases her for a really long time. It turns out that he is I don't even remember what his job is, but he works on a film set, and he's working on this horror movie called Shapeshifters Part 8, which is glorious, thinking about just how many Howling movies they actually ended up making, but it is sort of, at the same time, self-referential and also predicting just how ridiculous things were about to get, which I love. He asks if she wants to be in the movie. This village is so sheltered and off of the map that she doesn't even know what a movie is. She's never been to a movie before. And so they go to see this horror movie called It Came from Uranus. Yeah. This is the point where I realized that this movie wasn't really taking itself seriously at all, and I just sort of embraced it, because they're watching this movie, which makes it sound like it's going to be some weird sci-fi horror, but it isn't. It's a werewolf movie, and there's this guy who's sitting in a hospital bed, and all of the acting going on screen in this movie that they're watching is atrocious. The nurse has this extremely forced southern accent, and then the guy's accent. Alrighty, sorry about that. I was interrupted for just a moment, but anyway, I think I was talking about the movie they went to see, which references the original Howling, because the wolf transformation is pretty much based on, I believe it's the Eddie Quist transformation from the first Howling, because the face starts to bubble, and then the nails start growing out of him, and his face stretches. It really does do, beat for beat, the Eddie Quist transformation from the first Howling, but almost cartoonifies it because all the wolf makeup looks pretty goofy. And that's unfortunately the case with the other wolf makeup in the movie. There's this group of wolf nuns that are sent to try to bring, I think her name is Raboa. I will correct myself later if I'm wrong, but I believe her name is Raboa. That try to bring her back. I don't know why they're nuns. There's just really kind of no context for them, and their makeup is especially goofy. She goes to see a horror movie and sort of reveals to this guy later that night, because they sort of fall in love and they have sex, as tends to happen in these movies, and sort of tells him that she's a werewolf. During that night, she starts growing a pouch and fur, and it's pretty weird. Actually, I think she meets the director first, but anyway, she meets the director of this shapeshifter movie, and he is pretty entertaining. He's got this accent that's very exaggerated, this sort of British accent, and he almost sort of looks like Alfred Hitchcock. And even though he's not even in the movie, he like still wears a cape, and he's just very dramatic, and he loves the art of horror, and he's just completely over the moon about whatever she does in the movie, because he's like, you want to be in movies? And she's like, no. And he's like, perfect, I like somebody who's honest. She's in the movie. We see like this scene where she like does the same scream as she's attacked by this wolf like 5 times. It's almost identical every time, and he's just like, cut, 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 okay, that's perfect. And then there's the rap party for the movie where they're all dancing in this room, and everybody's in garb as like horror characters and things, and this guy who sort of becomes one of the main characters is dressed as a vampire. I'm not sure who she's supposed to be, but she's got almost this like Ophelia look with this long white dress and like this crown of white flowers, and it's revealed that sort of strobing lights triggers somebody to turn into a wolf, because there's all these flashing lights and she starts turning wolfy a bit, so she leaves, and then the nuns show up already sort of as full wolves and start terrorizing the film set in there. Then they end up bringing her back to the village, I think. Or actually, no, that's not true. First they take her to a hospital. This scientist finds her and starts trying to examine her and figure out what's happening. She turns into a wolf, and then the wolf nuns show up and massacre a bunch of people and then take her back to the village. It's pretty weird. So yeah, the wolf makeup's pretty ridiculous. I mean, there are moments like pre-full wolf transformation where she's got like just these contacts and these fangs, and it looks really cool, and then the wolf snout starts to emerge, and I'm just like, no. And then there's also a Russian ballet dancer who has moved to Australia, I believe, and she's also a werewolf, and I don't really understand why the subplot's there, although I kind of grew to like her as a character. It was pretty strange. Regardless, she ends up arriving at the town of Flo, and these scientists that have been trying to figure out what's going on with the wolves, and the government who are worried about the wolves, and the wolves from both places, and this guy from the movies who's fallen in love with Reboa, all end up in the town of Flo. And that's where I'm going to have to cut it for the plot, because I can't really say much else without spoiling things. So I'll just say this movie is pretty weird. It's really campy. It's not sort of campy in the way the second one was, though. It's got a sort of almost different flavor of weird charm to it, but it is sort of oddly charming, and I like it. It's not a quality movie in the way the first one is, and the plot is honestly kind of hard to follow, although the more I think about it, the more I understand what it was, but it was still kind of weird. This movie was pretty fun and sort of oddly charming and heartwarming in a way. I definitely recommend it if you like werewolves, and if you like just sort of campy horror movies in general. If that's your thing, please check the movie out. Now, spoilers. So the first spoiler, and this is my favorite because it's so stupid, and I never thought somebody would ever do this again, but they did, and oh my god. I can't believe I did not put this together until they sort of reveal it in the movie. Flo is wolf spelled backwards. They did the Troll 2 thing with Nilbog being goblin spelled backwards. The town is Flo, and I cannot believe I did not put that together sooner. Oh my god, that is dumb, and I love it. Once Reboa reaches the town, she goes into this barn, and she has a wolf baby. They don't really show us much of her pregnancy or the birth, thank God, but then she has a little wolf baby, and that whole scene was really awkward to watch because there's just this tiny little wolf baby thing. It's like this big that's crawling into this pouch in her skin, and it was kind of uncomfortable, but the more I thought about it, the wolf baby was actually really, really cute. We see it grow up, like fully grow up. Like we see it basically as the size of a normal baby, but covered in fur, and it makes like cat noises almost. It's actually pretty adorable. And then after it gets to the size of a like human toddler, it is like no longer constantly wolfy, it's a human. The rules of being a werewolf are practically non-existent at this point. I've kind of given up on that, although they do kind of try to give some explanation for it. It's all very vague and mythological, but there's a wolf baby, and it's cute, and it's weird. The scientists and the government basically storm the village and capture a bunch of the werewolves and bring them in for testing and put them under hypnosis and put these brain things on them, like these brain scanner things, and basically ask them about what the wolves are and where they come from. And apparently it has something to do with snow. I don't even know, because one of them, the Russian ballet dancer werewolf woman, says something about it beginning with the snow, or like the snow telling her something, or maybe it was like the other nasty werewolf guy. Werewolves have something to do with snow, and then earlier in the movie I remembered Raboa saying, like, does it snow here often? Because they're like in California. Something about snow. I don't know. And they talk about this wolf god that sort of, his spirit enters them and makes them into wolves, but I don't know. I just wrote down here, werewolf logic is confusing with like 3 U's, because it's really confusing. Bring them in, and then partway through this, I realized we're supposed to be rooting for the werewolves, because they're like this dying clan of people who are trying to just live their lives, even though there's like some weird, nasty abuse stuff that was sort of implied at the beginning, and it was pretty disturbing, and then it's kind of thrown out the window around the end of the movie. Basically, the army comes in by order of the president to wipe out the wolves because they are a menace to society, and we're on the wolves' side, which I liked but did not expect. President in this movie is one of the most just absolutely repulsive characters, because he's not only anti-werewolf, he's homophobic. Mr. Scientist guy falls in love with the Russian werewolf, and he's like, this werewolf is a female, right? Well, at least we have that going for us. And at that point, I was glad that I was already kind of glad about it, but I was glad that his big army of folks trying to massacre the wolves was being torn to pieces, because they kind of just get completely massacred, and we never hear about it again. And all of the gore scenes in this, there's not a lot of gore. There's just some blood, but a bunch of people die, and it was very, very comical. All the screaming in this movie does not sound real. It's very humorous, but they all die. One of them actually kind of blows himself up, and that kind of goes out the window. We get what is possibly the last thing I was expecting, which is this long, happy ending sequence of these werewolf-human families happily finding their way in society. And then the scientist goes back to the city and is doing this lecture, and he finds out that this is like years and years later, he finds out that one of the students there is the wolf baby of Raboa and the other guy all grown up. And he finds out that he's become a director and she's become a big actress under different names, and they are going to be on TV that night. They sort of have this happily ever after all set up, and I was like, that was not expected at all. And then they were like, they're going to be on TV tonight, and I was like, oh, and my mind instantly went back to the original Howling. They're on TV, and there's a bunch of paparazzi there, and naturally she ends up turning back into a wolf. And there's this announcer woman there who has this weird over-the-top campy performance. I don't even know what it is, but she starts screaming. It's filmed in that wide-angle lens again, and I don't know why, and everybody starts freaking out about it, and it really does kind of echo the first Howling and sort of everybody's reactions to that on TV. And then you see the wolf nuns, who are still full wolves, who are like all decked out in party gear, just watching. And the movie just kind of ends with her wolf snarling into the camera, and then the horror movie director reappears at the very end and just goes, cut. And then we cut to like some happy 80s song. So, I don't even know what happened exactly. I mean, I do, but I don't know why. It kind of feels like they just didn't know how to end the story, which I don't really know how to end stories either, for the most part. But it really just didn't have any kind of logical ending, but I still found it very entertaining, once again. I don't know if it's weirder than Howling 2, but I think it is, because those wolves were not marsupials. But, yeah. Again, if you just like campy, weird horror movies that have werewolves in them, you're gonna like this movie, I should expect. That's my review of Howling 3, The Marsupials. Thank you for watching this video. Please check out my other videos if you like what I'm doing. And thank you for checking my stuff out, and hopefully I'll see you in another video. Bye.